Welcome to Wildlife at Tampa's Lowry Park Zoo. We're in the manatee facility today, and we're on the public side looking at some manatees right now. But today's program is going to be focused strictly on manatee management in our rehab and release program. We're the only not-for-profit facility in the United States that has a critical care hospital for manatees. And today we're going to go behind the scenes and talk to our veterinarian and staff about the detailed management of this species. Okay, we're here at the medical pools, again, behind the scenes at the David A. Straz Jr. Manatee Hospital, and with Dr. Ray Ball, our Director of Medical Sciences, who's going to be working on one of the manatees today. Dr. Ball, tell us, what is the most common injury or problem that you face with manatees?
Some of the most common problems that we do face are boat strikes that result in pneumothorax, animals not being able to maintain their buoyancy. And another very common problem, and one we're going to be treating today, is entanglements, crab traps or monofilament lines, entangling pecks or the tails of manatees.
So if my numbers are correct, we're pretty close to having our 300th patient come into this hospital since the early 90s. Now, we're not necessarily proud of that, but that's just the reality of manatees in Florida. And as you say, most of these cases are boat strikes. So, on a scale of 1 to 10, what's the most horrific boat strike case you've ever seen while you've been here?
Several months we had an animal come in that actually had its tail completely amputated and parts of its thoracic cavity essentially opened up. It was just amazing that an animal like that could survive the impact of that originally, and then that it survived long enough to have the wounds become infected, necrotic. Very horrific things to see and experience.
Now as I said before, we're the only not-for-profit critical care hospital for manatees in the country, and so we get most of the cases. And again, as Dr. Ball just said, most of these cases have to do with boat strikes. If people were following the boating rules and in the no-wake zones, we probably have a lot less cases. And again, this is an endangered species, and it's one that's been mandated to the state of Florida to protect. And so our obligation as our signature conservation program is to make sure that we're ensuring the best medical care at all times. And so you're spending hundreds of hours on some of these critical care cases, I would imagine.
At times, some of the cases can become very involved and very lengthy, and some of these animals will spend a year, sometimes up to 18 months in captivity before they are capable of surviving in the wild.
Right. And that's your judgment call then when they're ready for re-release, working with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and so on and so forth, and the animals go back out where they were recaptured. Is that correct?
Yes, there's a team. We make sure that they're medically cleared, and then we consult with the FWSC, release committees, and plan the release. So there's a lot of people involved at that point.
This program is $1 million a year program for Lowry Park. That's what it takes to keep this hospital active and keep the cases going, to make sure that we're doing right by the animals. So now we're going to turn our attention to a treatment. Dr. Ball is going to be working with staff on an animal. There are 4 different subspecies of animals that live in the manatee family. One of those is the Amazon manatee, the West African manatee, and what's called the West Indian manatee, which is the one that occurs in Florida. The 4th member actually occurs in the western portion of the Pacific and into the eastern seaboard of Africa, and they're called dugongs, and they live very similarly to manatees. They look very similar, but they feed completely differently. There's only one facility that has dugongs in captivity, and it happens to be one of the aquariums in Japan. But the other 3 members, all called manatees, live either in Africa, North America, or South America. Again, all of these are critically protected species, mostly due to habitat loss. And the one that we deal with the most, or the one that we only deal with in Florida, is called the West Indian manatee. Again, an endangered species numbering approximately 3,500 animals. Okay, so I'm with Virginia, the animal care manager who oversees the manatee program here in Virginia. What are we doing? What are you doing right now? Your staff doing with the manatee in preparation for this procedure?
Well, while Dr. Ball works on the little manatee gator's peck, her flipper, we are just doing a scrub of her body. She came in with some cold stress too, so they get a little frostbite in winter, and she definitely had some. So all that skin is dying now and coming off of her that got a little frostbite on it, and we're just cleaning it up.
Okay. I mean, most people aren't going to see what we're looking at right now. So we've dry docked the animal. This floor raises up, brings the animal out of the water, so it's much easier to work with, obviously. And we'll do a routine like this any number of times a day, correct, depending on what's required?
Yeah, we will. The floors are great for that. It's less stress on the animals and the staff, so we don't have to keep them up or dry dock longer than we need to. And if somebody's getting upset, we can lower them down. But treatments can be 2 or 3 times a day, so the floors are great, have a great purpose here.
Okay. Well, we'll let Dr. Ball do what he needs to do now. And then what's the age of this animal approximately?
She's probably just maybe 10 months old.
Okay.
She came in about 315 pounds, and they're about, 365 at a year.
Okay.
So we're thinking she's just under a year old.
Okay. And how long have we had her?
Since November 13th.
November 13th. Okay. And how much will she eat in a day, roughly?
They eat about 10% of their body weight, and she's just starting to do that kind of thing for us, which is great. We want her to eat to get healthy.
Okay.
We're going to get her rolled over. There's a couple of bandages in there. I'll pull those out, turn the hose on there, just kind of flush it out a little bit. Then I'll probably take some dry gauze and just kind of quickly dab in there and see what's going on.
Okay.
Then Michelle insert the big syringes of lidocaine. Off some of that. We'll splash some of that in there, let it sit for a second or two, and then start to pack more stuff into it. So whenever you guys are ready.
So you can see it takes several people to prepare this animal for this procedure. And again, we're sitting actually on a floating dock right now just above the water line so that we can effectively work on this animal and not have to deal with being in the pool with her. So now you can see he's starting to remove some of the bandages that have been in there. This animal lost its left flipper. It was found that way. This was a result of a crab trap line that actually severed through that flipper. And she's been doing remarkably well. And she will probably stay here now for several months until we know that that's completely healed and that she would be successful fending on herself, by herself out in the wild.
The lidocaine, please.
Can I pull it off?
Yeah, you got it. You guys okay? And one of the sugar. And we pack the deepest part of the wound with gauze that are saturated in sugar. Helps with infection control and helps the tissues sort of granulate in, so you get a nice healthy bed of tissue coming in there. Okay, let's have some more lidocaine, please. Thank you. A little more lidocaine just to kind of numb her out. This will last a little while, make her feel a little bit better after us and they're messing around. But it's making a lot of good progress. We can let her relax for just a second. We need to dip. Let her take a little break. Catch her breath.
So you're happy with what you've seen?
Yeah, I am happy with it. I mean, considering a week ago we had to remove her humerus, so she has a pocket that's about that deep into there right now. And we're just backfilling that with these gauze and these bandages and the sugar just to help that tissue just kind of he'll drive the infection out. Yep, let's finish up here. These are good ones. And we just try to wedge these bandages in there the best we can, and they tend to stay fairly well. Last one, Michelle. You can see this line right here was the incision we made. This was the wound, and that's the incision we had to make to do the surgery.
So the most if she could actually reach you
And that's it. Well done.
Okay. So just a few minutes, but a critical few minutes while the animal's being reevaluated. The wound looks good. Now we'll get ready to lower this decking back down in the water and let the animal go back to swimming and eating. But you can see now, by looking at the animal, you can see where that rope or whatever it was went around her and then eventually severed that one pec. So again, this is a pretty serious case, and one that I think people need to understand what happens. Again, most of the issues with manatees when it comes to their survival have to do with man's intervention. They really have no natural predators, and so everything we can do to lessen these risks would certainly help this animal. Again, an endangered species that numbers roughly around 3,500 in the state of Florida. I'm with Caroline, who's our commissary manager. Now, commissary manager purchases all the food for all the animals in the zoo, so she's our professional shopper when it comes to grocery shopping. So, Caroline, we're talking specifically now about manatees. So, show us what we have here. We have like 3 different food sources here for manatees. So, explain what we have.
That's correct. In this tube here, we have our produce that we get from a produce company, and this is endive, and we also have some escarole here, which is a different type of lettuce, and then on this end, which has been chewed on, we usually have romaine, and this all comes from a produce company locally here in the Tampa area.
And then we now have started a pilot program with the city of Tampa to go harvest from the city reservoir the water hyacinth that comes into the intake. So show us this water hyacinth and the hydrilla.
Yeah, this is a great program that we have that's able to supplement some of the produce that we purchase. This item here is hyacinth, water hyacinth, and you'll see this floating on ponds. And then this is hydrilla, and this is actually submerged underwater. Usually they're on top of each other like this. And this is a natural diet that the manatee would forage on as they're going up and down a river.
Now, what's the average amount of purchased produce that we feed out in a day or a week?
Well, our produce definitely depends on our manatee load. On a heavy manatee load, we probably would order anywhere from 25 to 50 cases of romaine a day. On a lower end, maybe about 10 cases of romaine, and then 5 to 10 cases of the endive and escarole ordered. As far as poundage goes on the hydrilla and the hyacinth, we collect that twice a week usually, and then if it's a high manatee load, we'll get probably anywhere from 200 to 300 pounds of each item per harvest, so twice a week we would do that.
Now, what we normally feed when the animal's here for medical care is the romaine, and the endive, and so on and so forth, because it's a reliable source of food. And again, remember, these animals are under medical care, so they're somewhat compromised. We're trying now to switch over to water hyacinth and the hydrilla slowly, but again, we would need about 500 pounds a day reliably to offset the costs of the romaine. And just to give you an idea, this is actually, per animal, the most expensive animal we feed at Lowry Park, more expensive than an elephant. So again, because they're under medical care, The reliable source is the purchased product, which we have to have in place at all times, and we're going to slowly transfer over here to water hyacinth because that's what they eat in the wild. Now, when they're getting ready for transfer back to the wild, we do switch them over exclusively to the water hyacinth and the hydrilla. So when we're doing this twice, you said we're going over the reservoir about twice a week now, right? Yes. And that oftentimes just depends on the flow in the reservoir.
Yes, we've had calls where the reservoir have called and said we've opened the dam on the river and there's no hyacinth or hydrilla to be found, and so at those times we will not be able to go harvest, and we rely solely on our purchased produce for that.
What's great about this project, it is a pilot program. It helps out the city and the city reservoir to take this introduced weed, basically, from the intake, which helps the flow into the reservoir and the processing of the water. It helps us offset some of our food costs. Again, part of that $1 million a year, folks, is the food, and they consume a lot of food each day. And we just have a few manatees here right now, but our caseload has gone very high, up in over 20 animals at a time. And just to give you an idea, we, at that time, with over 20 animals, fed out, used more romaine lettuce than one of the large supermarket chains here in Florida, to give you an idea. So next time you're at the store and you're shopping for a romaine lettuce, remember what the manatees eat each day. We're in a clinic with Dr. Ball looking at some radiographs of manatees. So Dr. Ball, tell us what we're looking at on the screen here.
This is a manatee's pectoral limb. This is his flipper. This is a young animal. You can see the growth plates. You know, there's little bits of sesamoid bones in here. They're not all fused together. But these are all the individual digits of the flipper, the paddle. This would be the wrist. This is the radius and ulna. Then you get up to the humerus, which leads up to the shoulder joint.
Okay, so the animal that you were working on, what part did she lose when we were looking at this radiograph?
When that animal was caught up, her limb was intact, but then in the manipulation of it, the distal, from about actually the mid shaft of the humerus, this bone here just kind of fell off of her. So we were looking at this part on in her when she came here, and this part was actually exposed. I have another film that maybe shows.
Sure, yeah, please do. Yeah.
This animal, again, is on her side. These are her rib cages, and this is her shoulder joint. So the humerus is right here. So this animal basically came in with flesh to about that level that you can see right there on the limits of the x-ray. And that's her shoulder joint. So what we had to do is actually do the surgery here, and we saw the surgery site earlier, dissect down to this joint and disarticulate it right there. And then we're just letting it heal up like that.
It's remarkable. The pain must have been excruciating for this animal, and obviously it was over a period of time, to basically lose a limb in this process. And now you can see through the great science of radiographs, those very clear pictures in what's involved. It's a very, very difficult process. You mentioned it took you quite a while just to get to that point to be able to remove that.
It was. This was actually one of the more difficult things I've done as a professional. The bone is very deep-seated into the body of that animal. You can palpate the margins of that joint, but to actually get a scalpel and dissect it away safely took quite a doing.
This is just one of the many cases, like I said, almost 300 cases now that we've dealt with. While it was certainly an exception, it just shows to the degree that we have to go to ensure that we give these animals the best medical care. And thanks to great technology and great expertise, this animal will go back out in the wild. It will be thriving and hopefully reproducing someday. So again, another inside look behind the scenes of the Manatee Medical Hospital. Thank you for joining us today while we looked at our signature conservation program, Manatee Rehabilitation and Rescue. Join us next month on Wildlife at Tampa's Lowry Park Zoo.